can I just ask, if you're not going on holiday next week, like John Potter is, would you be so kind as to get yourselves down to Mid Bedfordshire and try and get Emma Holland-Lindsay elected as our next Liberal Democrat MP? That's what I'm doing next week. And we need more people. We get to beat both Tories and Labour in this one, which is amazing. So please come, please help.
We're back and we decided to do a summary of the whole conference season, and we have got two of the best people I could think of or who were available to be able to do this chat about how the parties feel at the end of the conference season. Has there been much shift? Did we get surprised by anything? So we have, obviously, now she's in the Federal Conference Committee, we had to have Hannah Kitchen come in. Welcome, Hannah.
Hello, John. Hello, Lisa.
And we have, and as Anna's just alluded, we have Lisa Smart in, one of our key speakers on the conference as well. I think we all saw Lisa's speech and got that rallying cry deep within our souls to go out and not be in a knit and natter group. Hello, Lisa.
Hello, John. Hello, Hannah.
Right, so let's start off. We'll go in like kind of a rough sort of order. So let's start off with the Lib Dem conference, and I suppose we'll get the elephant in the room out of the way first, which is about the housing thing that kind of exploded up. And I kind of, before I send it to, we'll go to Lisa first on this. I suppose the one thing I want to say about this is to all Lib Dems is you need to learn to disagree better, some of you. And actually, if you think you are the font of all knowledge, or that your experience is typical, let alone universal, then you are probably not going to survive in politics because your views are that inflexible. But that's all I'm going to say on it, Lisa. Your views generally on that and how the conference went for the Lib Dems.
So, conference broadly, I thought was a real success. I think it was the first in-person conference, autumn conference we'd had for 4 years. I think we had a lot of interest from corporates, from media, in a way that exceeded expectations. So I know I'm a candidate in a target seat, and I had a lot of people write to me in the weeks running up to conference say, please, can we meet you? We're going to be in Bournemouth. We'd love to talk to you about our
Really? Now that's interesting. Who are these people?
So they're charities, they're campaign groups, some corporates, lobby groups, who are interested in making sure they know who potential future MPs are, want to make sure they've got contacts. Because I think some of them remember 2010, where they didn't have any idea who the Lib Dems were, and then they found that they had the Secretary of State for their relevant area as a Liberal Democrat, and they had no idea what they thought about anything. So it's just sensible lobby work in advance. I chose to meet 2 people. I was probably invited to about 30-odd meetings, and I said yes to 2 that were on issues that I care about and I'm working on that were of particular relevance. So there was you can see the health of where conference is as to, I think in lots of ways, is to, yes, how many members go, but also how big the exhibition is, how many fringe meetings there are, how many people want to get to know Lib Dems and be known by Lib Dems. So I think on any of those scores, a real positive from Lib Dem conference in Bournemouth.
And the vibe
for
was
me.
So
yeah, the vibe was great. Yeah. It was really positive. It was upbeat. And I think some of that is us having lots to be really cheerful about as a party. So it may have been mentioned 28 or 30 times that we won 4 big by-elections over this parliament, and we should rightly be chuffed about that and be grateful to everybody who contributed to it. But also, I think as a party, we took a beating in the last 3 elections for all sorts of reasons, many of which we've talked about at length on this podcast. But we've done a lot of the hard work as a party to get ourselves with a strategy that is looking at winning elections. Because if you don't win elections, you don't get to change the stuff that we all want to do. So I think there was a real, I think there was contentment around that. I have got to answer the doorbell.
Okay, there we go. I will let Lisa, we'll just pause there probably. Hannah, it's easy to do that. But you do know that now Rocket is coming straight to your house whenever we don't have a dog sitter.
Yeah, I love him, and he can come and stay anytime he likes, as long as we're here. That's fine. I love his little face.
You're gonna have blonde and red hairs everywhere.
Well,
actually, does your setter shed lots?
No.
No, okay. You're gonna have. Well, this is gonna be a surprise for you.
Oh no, I'm familiar with golden retrievers. It's top of my list really as to why I would never own a golden retriever.
Is she in the
my
shed
best
with
friend.
you? Is she in the shed with you?
This is her. So
I thought you had a stroking motion. Ah, what a cute.
Oi, what are you doing? Where's John?
Dog chat. Oh, is that the phone?
Please report back to your colleague that his little package is here.
He insists on being called my line manager. I'm not. It's not a colleague. He's a boss. Sorry. I don't know if we'll just pause there, Lisa. So I don't know if you just want to pick up from where you were. I can't remember where you were.
If you can.
We talked about the
vibe. So the vibe. So overall, a really positive conference, I think, and a lot of positive media pickup that I think the press team, the media team should be really pleased with. I think Ed's speech landed well. And so lots to be positive about there. John, you mentioned housing targets, and it was the one controversial motion, really. It was the one policy row. And I think I always feel, I love conference because I get to see my friends who I only ever see at conference. I get to recharge my Lib Dem batteries. I get to be really nerdy and talk about stuff that none of my other friends and family will put up with me talking about. And I'm always disappointed when we don't have a bit of a row in the auditorium. I feel conference committee doesn't deliver if everything's just agreed upon. That's not what we're about. And so actually, quite often it's Trident or it's,
schools.
Every 2 years we disagree about Trident, or there's all sorts of stuff that we can fall out about as Lib Dems. This time it was about, should we have a number on our housing, on the number of houses we should build, or should it be all of the other stuff that was in the motion without a number on it? So there was the motion itself that went to conference, I thought was really strong. It talked about things like leasehold and freehold, so getting rid of leasehold. It talked about support for renters. It talked about lots and lots of really good chunky policy stuff, 150,000 social homes being built per year, all of that, which I was really very strongly in favour. And I think pretty much all of us agreed on that. Everyone in the hall agreed on what was in there. It was just, there were some who submitted an amendment, the Young Liberals and some others, about should we have a number on the number of homes that should be built every year. And I thought the quality of the debate, the hall was packed. For those who weren't there, the hall was absolutely packed. I think some of the speakers spoke extremely well. I think your point, John, about, or for all of us, is a good reminder of extrapolating our own individual experience with, well, this must be the experience of everybody. Because yes, housing is an issue that stops people fulfilling their potential. So if you can't find a home, if you can't find a safe, warm, affordable home, you can't fulfill your potential. You can't do all the things that you want to do, and it holds you back, which we as Liberals should feel very angry about. Not everybody wants to live in the same part of the country. Not everybody has the same circumstances. And so thinking about that, extrapolating from your own experience is not the right thing to do. For me, I love the fact that the leaders on the front row, on one side of a debate, he's got a young Liberal wearing a T-shirt 2 rows down from him. They're on different sides of this particular argument, but their vote counts exactly the same. And I think that is a huge strength for our party and something we should be really, really proud of. And I would fight really hard if anybody tried to change that.
Yeah, and I suppose, Hannah, you're going to talk about it as well, but I suppose the point is, you're saying is we were disagreeing over a tiny fraction of a percentage of that whole policy. And actually, if you look at the other two parties, what we disagree on is so minimal as Lib Dems, and sometimes we get into our own heads that somehow this is an existential threat to the makeup of the Lib Dems, when actually you're disagreeing about a couple of lines in a particular motion that everyone's already forgot about a week later. So I think just a little bit of kind of realising where you are in the world maybe kind of needs to come to it. But Hannah, you obviously are part of why conference works so well as part of the team that has to run it, and also be in contact with us, listeners and viewers. Anything that didn't go well, let's just let us know, and we'll make sure we pass that on to Hannah. Okay, Hannah, but generally, I suppose the important point from that housing debate, and I'm going to be a bit devil's advocate here, did we have enough controversial debates in there that the one controversial debate we did have was about housing?
So I think for me, the purpose of conference has two purposes. Number one, in this delightfully democratic party in which we exist, it is our only way of setting policy. Yeah. So, the Tory and the Labour conferences, which we'll come on to in a minute, they can waffle and whiffle and say whatever big promises they like, or say things at conference, and then in whatever 3-6 months time, they can produce a manifesto that expands on all of that or ignores all of that and as something completely different. We can't do that as Lib Dems. If we want a policy to go into our manifesto, it has to go through conference first. Okay, so that is, that it has to have gone through conference at some point, Lisa. We don't need to discuss every point of policy at every single conference, because if something is already existing policy as agreed on conference, we don't need to go there again. So that's number one. But for me, the whole point of conference, the whole point of actually being in a political party is to win elections. And with this being very likely the last conference before a general election, as Federal Conference Committee, we had to go into this conference, with a very clear remit of, number one, ensuring our candidates and MPs have got enough of the right policy to campaign on in a general election, and number two, to ensure we don't actually shoot ourselves in the faces by creating some utterly suicidal policy that will lose us lots of seats in the next general election. So that was sort of primarily the focus. And so, as is often the way with conferences before general elections, yes, it was a fairly tame agenda. We didn't need to talk about nukes again. We did that in spring. That one's ticked off, thankfully, for a couple of years now. But the last conference before a general election is not the time to be having pinhead arguments about radical policy. So there's certainly a question mark about was the housing target debate the right debate to have. I'm not going to get involved in that. I'm going to pretend that I have to be impartial because I sit on FCC. It's not true at all. But I had another commitment at that time, so I tragically couldn't be in the hall for that one. However, was that amendment and that debate on housing targets a really good illustration and example of how democracy within the Liberal Democrats works? Yes, it absolutely was. I had a conversation with Helen Morgan in the run-up to conference because I was campaigning with her in mid-bed, and she said, "Look," she said, I don't like the look of that amendment. I don't want it, but I recognise it's a debate we need to have, and I recognise, it's a debate we may win or it's a debate we may lose, and that is the point about conference in the Liberal Democrats. And I have to say, the quality of the debate at some points was, I think, I'm going to say disgraceful. There were some very personal attacks levelled against Helen Morgan on Twitter, which is a massive, massive overstep and is completely unacceptable. Everyone knows I was no massive fan of Joe Swinson's leadership, but she talked about one thing, which was disagreeing well, and she did that a lot. There's absolutely no space for that sort of personal attacks and arguments within your party. It's just not necessary. However, I believe that the debate in the hall went extremely well. Obviously the FCC chairs have to set it up so that it's balanced and represents the balance of the speakers' cards that were submitted. And the amendment was clearly passed both online and in the hall. And that is Lib Dem internal party democracy. So that is now our policy, and it is the campaigns teams and the leadership teams' job, to go out and campaign on that. And I think, to be fair, when you look at Labour's kind of, they building more houses has been a thing that's, been quite a big thing through their conference. Well, we've committed to building more houses, I think. Is that right? Yeah. That isn't my strong point. We've committed to building more houses than Labour, so they can't be shouting at us about that one anymore. So yeah, it was neededly not the most radical of agendas. However, has it set us up really, really well for an upcoming general election? Yes, it has.
Lisa.
So I agree strongly with Hannah about the strength of internal democracy and the place for it, and about disagreeing better. And I think if a nuanced argument is what you're looking for, Twitter probably isn't the place to find it. The point about the policy itself, without wishing to get into the weeds, is that actually it just recommitted to existing policy. So the previous policy did talk about a housing figure. The proposal, Helen's proposal, was just not to have the target in there, and then the amendment put it back in. And so it's really no change. It was just a refresh of where we're up to. I think for me, some of the massive positives for me, of course, seeing my friends, catching up with people who I only ever see. For me, I was really proud. I want to share a story about I submitted an amendment to party policy on the transport motion, which is not something I've done before. And I did it because I've never done it before. And I also thought we were missing a trick in our transport policy. So I'm not going to nerd out and talk about what my amendment actually was about, because I'm aware we've only got a fixed amount of time for this podcast, but it was a genuinely enjoyable process. So to anybody listening who is thinking about, well, I want to get involved in policy, I think there's something we could change and do something about, having been through it and done it for the first time, proposed an amendment, as in submitted it, proposed it, and it got voted through, there's a real sense of, well, I feel a sense of ownership of our party policy now. And I'd really recommend other people doing it.
Yeah, I just really like to echo that. I think, as someone who now sits on Federal Conference Committee, and I see all the motions and the amendments that come through, there is a fairly limited pool of people who submit those motions and amendments. And, we see a lot of the same names, coming up over and over again. And this opportunity is open to everybody. And, this is we are a major political party, and members get, they get to have a really direct input into writing our policy. And, there's loads of caveats around it, around RFPC working on a paper. We wouldn't accept an alternative motion to that, but you can get involved in that sort of directly. And I think it's worth bearing in mind as well that FCC offer drafting advice, because some of the amendments we receive are absolutely incomprehensible and simply cannot be accepted on the basis they're just an absolute word salad. So FCC do offer drafting advice. But I think, my complaint about conference has always been that for me, it's always felt like a bit of a secret club. There's a lot of assumed knowledge around conference for people that have gone to conference a lot, and people like me who, I don't really care about policy particularly. I like winning elections. I just like winning stuff, to be perfectly honest. And I like seeing my friends, and I like going to the bar. And I am, I'm feeding back on the sort of opacity of some of those documents and the size of some of those documents. And I just, I have access issues around, I have ADHD, and I find, massive, great big 160-page documents just completely overwhelming. And since being on FCC, I now feel like I'm part of that club. I get it, primarily because I've been forced to sit in 10-hour of Zoom meetings where it's been like drilled into my brain, and I've had no choice but to get my head around it. But what I don't want to close that door behind me, so really, really I'm encouraging FCC to make conference more accessible in lots of ways, more transparent, less opaque. And it's so nice to get amendments from someone like Lisa. Lisa's just like, deliver more leaflets, knock on my doors, deliver more leaflets, knock on my doors. Oh, and here's a really pithy amendment on transport policy. That's what we want. Because frankly, the overlap between Liberal Democrats who want to win elections and Liberal Democrats who want to sit in the conference auditorium voting on policy, there's not enough overlap there. There's not enough overlap there, and we need more. So we're a campaigning podcast, and I would really encourage people to sort of, and don't tell me all the complaints, but if you feel, how do I get involved? How can conference be more accessible to me as a campaigner? Please give me a shout, because that's definitely something that I want to do. on conference committee.
And also, we don't just want people who are policy wonks, for lack of a better word. We want people who are on the ground doing the nuts and bolts stuff to feed into it. So again, I'm not going to sit up and listen or watch or read a dozen books on electoral cycle reform or something like that. Other people can do that. But I do actually want to feed in what my experience of how that might go on the doorstep, on actually what the lived experiences of people actually on the ground, because we all know Lib Dems have got this stuff wrong a few times by being in that little bubble where it sounds absolutely great to mates in conference who all share the same values. As soon as it goes out of conference, it lands like a bag of sick with the public. And actually, we all need to have that kind of. I'm preaching what I don't actually do, because I've never even spoken at a conference, let alone done anything. And given how much I like to talk, but of course, this conference ended up with me in A&E. So it probably wasn't the best example. So when everyone else was debating houses, I was getting like a heart scan. So we'll see. So most people had a better conference than me. But you're right. I think the overriding thing I get is that the Lib Dems feel like we're in a good place running up to the election, and not just in terms of the vibe, which Lisa talked about, but actually in a place where I think we know what we have to do. And that was interesting from the press coverage, that I think focused is what the Lib Dems seen in our comments. We know we're not going to win 200 seats. We know we're not probably going to win 100 seats. Well, we're not going to win 100 seats. We know we have 50 or so by-elections that we're going to win next year for that general election. Lisa being one of them, and making sure we get them over the line and make sure we don't have policies that are going to hurt that. Make sure people know where we need to be, I think, has been the biggest thing from this conference. Hannah?
Number one, I think that was my 25 or so by-elections that we're going to win face. There was another quite heated debate at conference that people who weren't concentrating might have missed, which was that there is a certain subset of our party membership who you might all be familiar with, who are, I think it's fair to say, absolutely obsessed with us rejoining the EU. And even though we've lost 2 Brexit elections really quite miserably, really quite keen that we have another general election purely on Brexit and the issue of rejoining the EU. And there was an attempt to submit a couple of amendments restating that, even though it's already existing party policy, that we will rejoin the EU at the earliest possible opportunity. And what I heard a lot about this was, but the members in Twickenham aren't clear what our policy on the EU is. And what I said to them, and I did have to say this also from the conference podium, was that every single voter on the doorsteps in Barnsley is very clear what the Liberal Democrats' policy on rejoining the EU is, which is, well, the Libs would take us back in, wouldn't they? Take us back in tomorrow if they could. So, I don't know why that hasn't got through to our membership in Twickenham, insert other very Remainy local parties here, because, the good voters of Barnsley, who I speak to far more than I do Liberal Democrat members, are very, very clear on what our policy is, and it did not need reiterating at conference.
We should also, just before Lisa comes in, let us know that tickets will be going on sale very soon for Hannah's one-woman show that she'll be doing, courtesy of the Lib Dem podcast, including accents from around the country. Which obviously it's very exciting. So we will put them out on our Patreon subscribers first, and make sure you do think it's a Barnsley woman in Twickenham is what we're going to call it. Lisa.
So important to say, John, that we're all very pleased that your trip to A&E resulted in you being released, because you just kind of skimmed over that, and many of the listeners won't know that you took unwell, got yourself checked out, and are doing fine now. So I think that's important to say, and we're all very pleased about that, and that you took yourself off to A&E quite rightly and didn't just hang around the auditorium debating housing numbers. So I think you made the right
That might have sent me over the edge.
Hannah, Hannah talked rightly about rejoining the EU and party policy and where we are on that. Just a flag for a future episode of the pod where we'll be discussing party membership in some more detail, and that's going to be recorded next month, which I'm very much looking forward to. Unsurprisingly, I will be talking about winning elections as a key focus for us as a political party. But there we go. Let's see what other people have to say. My second favourite debate of the week was the constitutional amendment that was about constitutional amendments. And if any of you are unclear about what peak Lib Dem looks like, you might think it's about leaflets. You might think it's about debating membership or otherwise of the European Union. But no, it's when we talk to ourselves about ourselves and about our own constitution. And there was a reference back. It was a beautiful little example of why we don't win more elections, in my opinion. It was just extraordinary. It really was. And FCC, I think, in the end, took the reference back and agreed to come back to the next conference. And so we're going to talk about it again, which was, I think, in every possible way, a thing of beauty.
I won't let Hannah go into that because the faces she was pulling, we might submit her to the world.
All I can really say is it 6 p.m. on a Sunday evening. I can't remember what day it was. It's still bled into one. 6 p.m. on a Sunday evening, and I think I did say to Nick DaCosta, who's the chair of FCC, let's just accept this reference back and go to the fucking bar, please, Nick.
Absolutely, that sounds like a plan. Right, so let's now go on. So Lib Dems, I think, were generally accepting that, conference did what it needed to do. Well done to everyone involved. I hope you all had a wonderful time. Let's move on to the Tory party conference. Now, I think the main part of this was, just how utterly shambolic that party has become. They didn't sound like a party in government, let alone a party that wants to win an election within a year's time. Obviously, Sunak had 3 big announcements. HS2, which he denied for 4 days, so the media cycle completely took over the conference, and then came up with this Network North plan, which most of it is either been promised before, has already happened, or is now just an aspiration. So nonsense. The smoking ban from age 14 up going higher, so eventually people will not be able to smoke, which is interesting in terms of how much cut through that gets will be interesting. And then the A-level reforms, which basically will not take place before any sort of general election anyway. So but it feels like, for me, and I'll go Hannah first this time, that the Tory party conference was a leadership contest for as many bonkers right-wingers as possible who want to step on guide dogs' tails, which is, if you don't know what I'm referring to, please Google that. But also, it just, outside of the leadership contest, it just felt like they just didn't have a clue where they wanted to be, or even what kind of party they wanted to be. Not to mention, it was nearly deserted, Hannah. If you look at the vibe in the Lib Dem conference and you look at the photos from Manchester, it looked a very depressing place to be a Tory.
Yeah, it's unusual, isn't it? Because the thing we know about the Tories is, they can usually kind of pull it out the bag and look like an organised, coherent, professional political party when they need to. And, where they're squabbling over housing targets and constitutional amendments. And, it's normally the Labour Party that's getting pulled down by its own factions. And, the Conservative Party is looking very, very divided and factional at the moment. I think the overwhelming sense that I got from the whole thing is this is all completely irrelevant. None of this is going to happen before the next general election, and you're not going to win the next general election. So none of this is going to happen anyway. That was the sort of overwhelming feeling that came out of it. The HS2 announcement was an interesting one. For us over in Yorkshire, the Leeds leg of HS2 was already pulled back in 2021. So there's, we've already gone through that disappointment. And I think to be fair, what he did was quite clever because, really, if I was to speak to my kind of voters, neighbours, residents, friends around and about here, they would say, well, we don't really want HS2. We don't want to be able to get to London 10 minutes quicker. And I mean, let's not go into why the Yorkshire leg of HS2 was an absolute disaster from the start anyway, but that he's absolutely right in saying that people don't care about London big city connectivity when their local transport infrastructure is so horrific. So while he's kind of quite widely been condemned by sort of big voice politicians across the north, because we all understand that HS2 isn't about getting to London 20 minutes quicker. It's about building capacity in order to allow Northern Powerhouse Rail. We know all of that, but most people on the street, don't really care about that. They care about the fact that there's no buses and the trams have never got outside of Sheffield, and there's one train an hour to Sheffield and it takes 45 minutes and it's made of old bus parts. That's what people care about. So it'd be interesting to know like what voters sort of think about that, because the whole, well, let's forget about this big project that you can't see how is relevant to you and instead invest in local infrastructure, I think is a reasonable message. However, it was just underpinned with this tone of, well, all this stuff you've announced either already exists or you committed 2 years ago, and we've got absolutely no faith that you're going to pull any of it off anyway. So I think it all just kind of fell a little bit flat, really.
And before I bring Lisa in, the thing about tone is very interesting, because I don't think I think this is Rishi's greatest failing, is he just comes across like some petulant head boy who's angry that he has to explain stuff to you. And it's such an unattractive kind of quality in him. And if you were like someone who's doing comms for him, you'd just think, even the slogan, what's the slogan? A brighter future for long-term decisions, or something horrendous like that they've come up with. It sounds like a technocrat has said, I want to say this, and this is how we're going to put it, regardless of how it actually sounds from a comms point of view. But the HS2 thing is very odd, because, I'm not going to lie, I for a long time have wondered whether that amount of money was worthwhile compared to greater interconnectivity in the north. But it shouldn't be an either or. And the fact that we've got such woeful transport in this country, and I've been very blessed to go somewhere like Japan, where you see what an actual modern day integrated transport system is like, and you just think we are so far behind. But and I do love the quote that someone put, I think it was a question time, which I don't know which was, if it had started in the north, it absolutely would get finished all the way down to London rather than the opposite way. But Lisa, as someone who is, not just talks about transport, does amendment to transport policies, which we've just found out, you clearly will have all the knowledge on this that we ever need.
Yeah. So this is not a podcast about HS2.
No.
So I'll say 2 sentences about it before I talk about Tory Party conference. But HS2, the reason why it's a bad thing for the North is because the really expensive bit of Northern Powerhouse Rail, which is the tunnelling between Manchester Airport and the city centre, was going to be delivered by HS2. So that connectivity across the North, which everybody agrees is vital, that east-west from Liverpool to Leeds and then on to Hull, is now put in doubt and in jeopardy because HS2 phase 2B has been cancelled. So that was all I'm going to say on HS2. It's the wrong decision, but there we are. In terms of Tory party conference, they just sounded to me like a party of opposition. They did not sound like they were the government talking about differences they were going to bring in, changes they were going to make, policies they were going to implement. They sounded, yes, John, you're right, like a load of leadership contenders. And if you actually looked at what they said, Penny Mordaunt's speech, if you heard it just before introducing Sunak, Hannah's used the phrase word salad already. It was just, I'm genuinely not sure what was going on there. They did not sound like the government. They did not sound like they were able to pull on the levers of government and make change happen. And I know we're not the target demographic for Suella Braverman's protestations about immigration and about various other things, but I think just the language that's used is both very online, so was talking about a meat tax, was talking about some of the real conspiracy theory rabbit holes about 15-minute cities and various other things that just won't have made it through to lots of voters. They just sounded like they weren't the government.
Yeah.
And they shouldn't be, and let's all work on making sure that happens.
You two are being very good at putting your hand up before speaking. I don't know, you've either just come from council or school. I don't know what's happened. Hannah?
I would just never dare interrupt Lisa Smart. That's
okay, yeah, that's a good point.
Lisa's absolutely right. The sort of the stuff they were coming out of, it sounded like policy made on Twitter rather than rather than the issues that we know come up on the doorsteps. We've all spoken to, I'm in a Labour facing area, but I speak to loads of Conservative voters. I've been campaigning on all the by-elections, and yes, immigration comes up, but there was some real barrel scraping populist nonsense. And
about migrants and stuff like
that. Yeah, and I think it's really important as well that we mention the transphobia issue as well, because that is a problem that has been getting become more and more part of mainstream media and political narrative. And for all of our transgender and non-binary friends across the country to have to watch the actual Prime Minister stand up and say, oh, we all know perfectly well that a man is a man and a woman is a woman and no one can change that. I mean, aside from the fact that that's complete and utter bullshit, that flies in the face of scientific and social understanding, that really is playing into a very, very niche, ugly. Yeah, it's not something that comes upon the doorsteps often. It's a repeated opinion polls show that the vast majority of people are completely supportive of the LGBTQ plus community. Attitudes have changed a lot. To be dragging sort of hatred of another minority right into,
and a vulnerable minority. That this is the danger of it.
To put that front and center in the Prime Minister's speech to party conference, I think is absolutely astonishing, absolutely horrifying, and really just shows like how far the Conservatives have fallen, to be honest, under Sunak. Look back a few years, Theresa May. It was Theresa May who actually started the process to overhaul the Gender Recognition Act. You would have never heard the likes of Theresa May, David Cameron, Margaret Thatcher. Well, no, Margaret Thatcher. Oh, she did that, didn't she? I mean, she did it with Section 28. Maybe we've gone full circle.
But you're right. I mean, I've done 8, maybe 9 Canvas sessions since Sunak's speech. None of it has turned up ever on any of them. But I think for me, and I alluded to this in a post I put on my socials about the danger, not so much of this election, because I think the Tories are going to get thumped, but of what happens if Labour get into power, they have a difficult economic ride. What happens 5 years later? What kind of Tory party is going to the electorate at that point? And you've seen Nigel Farage, you've seen Priti Patel, all these kind of vile I was going to say creatures, vile politicians vying for basically the leadership and control of the Tory party, which is in essence the UKIP party now. I think basically UKIP has taken over that Tory party, and if they get a mandate in 6 years' time, that is a terrifying place for Britain to be. And why it's important we learn to win elections is that Labour are very scared to take on these issues. We have to be the people that push back. Lisa, you've got a scowl.
I've got a scowl just because you call people vile, and I think many of the things they say are vile, but I just get a bit twitchy sometimes when we talk about people in some ways. So I think absolutely many of the things that both Priti Patel and Nigel Farage have said are vile, and I think some of their actions are deeply vile and dangerous and damaging and all of that. But I just get a bit twitchy when we're talking about dehumanising, which we were, and I agree with absolutely everything Hannah said about the actual Prime Minister of the actual United Kingdom choosing some of the stuff that he talked about is surely beneath him and beneath our government. I just get a bit twitchy about it, that's all. I think the fact, before we move on to Labour, I think talking about the fact that Farage was there and him being a potential member of the Tories and coming in to lead it, people were talking about that. And of course, some of that's the media just winding up a story and thinking about that. But the fact that the Tory party has got itself to a place where it's now a mainstream discussion that actually Farage might be an entirely appropriate leader for the Conservative Party of the United Kingdom, I think that's just, that says a lot about where they've travelled.
And we'll see what happens post Sunak, what happens after this election, because my gut instinct is they will go more right-wing. I think oppositions tend to double down on their mistake before they realise which way they're heading. The kind of Miliband went to Corbyn. Where do the Tories go after this? It could be a Badenoch, it could be a Braverman, it could be someone whose politics is so far out of kilter from what the norm has been in British politics that it will be a strange new world we go into. Let's get into Labour very briefly, because I don't want to, because basically I've only got about 10 minutes left before I have to leave this room because there's another meeting. But now Labour Party, Hannah. Now, you obviously are good friends with the Labour Party, never really say a bad word about them at all. What was the point of the Labour Party conference?
I think it was twofold. I think it was a bit of gloating to tell us that they're going to be the next government. And I also think, so I was thinking this just as you were talking about the Conservatives' lurch to the right. I think that, we know a lot of moderate Conservatives left under Johnson. A lot of those sort of David Cameron, One Nation Conservatives moved away from the Tories under Cameron. And now these are people who, previously would not have touched the Labour Party with a barge pole. And I don't know if people have seen this week, Anna Soubry has come out and said that she will be voting Labour in the next general election. I don't know where she lives. I don't know if that's going to make any difference or not. But I think that lurch of the Conservatives to the right has left, if you like, a vacuum, which of kind of, not overtly racist, but still very authoritarian, pro-business Conservatives that Starmer's trying very, very hard to fill. So I think that Starmer is kind of doing his best to come across as a efficient and competent Tory. And again, electorally, probably the right thing to do. They need, screaming at Tories that they're vile and awful people that, who should die, which is generally what the Labour Party do, isn't really the way to get them to vote for you. Yeah. So, if they're going to switch Tory votes in the numbers that they need to, and which they haven't been doing, even in their by-election wins, that seems to be where he's positioning himself, which is why I think we're not seeing a huge amount of sort of clear water between things the Tories are saying or have been saying and things that Starmer is saying. So, just this week, Sunak said he'd cancel HS2. Starmer said, yes, we probably wouldn't be able to build that. They talked about a smoking ban. Wes Streeting said, yes, that's a splendid idea. Let's do that. There's been very little condemnation of the comments about immigrants, about trans people. There's been very little condemnation of that from Labour.
And they've got form Labour with this, though, haven't they? Because if you think about it, they've got, whether it was a two-child policy, whether it's Brexit, whether it's tuition fees, where it's all these things that, Starmer's very much said, don't rock the boat with Tory voters. That's my line that I'm going to take. And I suppose, Lisa, from our point, he's done an extraordinary job of getting discipline into that Labour Party. I think that's the thing that's come into it.Maybe the left of the Labour Party is just so beaten down they don't want to do it. But speaking to Labour, kind of left-leaning Labour councillors in Lancashire, they're kind of like, hold our nose, get rid of these Tories, and then hopefully we can get something out of Starmer later on when we're in government, hopefully, from their point of view.
And you use the word discipline. I think it's exactly the right one. I think we think about the job we had to do within the party post 2019. You add on top some of the fundamental structural issues that they had as a party. I'm thinking anti-Semitism. I'm thinking some of the control of their NEC, and they had a real job to do. And I think they've done much of that work. So I think credit should go to them for making the Labour Party less terrifying for your average everyday voter than they were in the run-up to 2019. I think in terms of the message discipline, which is what Hannah's talked about, what you've talked about there, John, about not wanting to let there be wide open space between some of the Tory policies and some of the Labour policies. I think they're wanting to choose what they want to fight the election on and try and stop the Tories from defining it. So that's why the Tories are doing all this absolutely bonkers but deeply damaging, destructive culture war stuff, because they want to fight it on that. And that's why they just keep doubling down and saying even more abhorrent things about and trying to dehumanize minority groups in our community. And that's why they're doing it, to try and get people to talk about that rather than talk about the things that most people are thinking about most of the time. And so I think that it's showing discipline, across most of the front bench team most of the time. So it's not just Starmer, because I think they've probably worked out Starmer's charisma is not going to be enough to power them through an election campaign. They are going to need to look at some other levers to pull. And so not fighting it on the turf that the Tories want is probably a reasonable decision. I think the other thing, of course, that this isn't the podcast to talk about tactics and campaigning approach, but using your firepower where it matters most. So which are the seats they need to win? Who are the voters within those seats that they need to switch? And what are the issues they care about? Great, let's have some solutions for them there.
Yeah. And you can see, sorry, Hannah, just to say, if anyone's ever read Deborah Mattison's book, which is Beyond the Red Wall, which she wrote before she then joined Keir Starmer's team, you can see that right the way through in their approach and what they're doing in terms of, getting the union flag onto the posters. Really detailed stuff that Deborah Mattison did work on is now very much at the fore of Labour Party strategy. Hannah?
Yeah, I was just going to say, it's a battle for the Red Wall, isn't it? It's that they know that all the kind of like more sort of, if you like, socially liberal minded Labour voters in places like Leeds and Manchester and Sheffield and London and Cambridge will hold their noses, and well, they probably won't hold their noses, to be honest. They'll just vote Labour anyway, and so they're targeting those sort of more marginal voters. I'm not good at this time of year, when the nights are getting shorter and the days are getting shorter, and it's all getting dark, and it's not great for my mood. And I have spent the last week like spiraling into a pit of despair about the thought of a Labour government. And yeah. It's like, don't get me wrong, absolutely some things. I want rid of the Tories. They're absolutely horrific and they need to go. But my God, it's depressing that that's the only alternative. Some stuff will be better. I've no doubt that NHS waiting lists, will come down. I've no doubt that schools and local government will be better funded. Though I'm pretty sure they said this week that they can't promise better funding for local government or schools.
I'm not sure about that. I don't know where they're going to get.
Stop! You're ruining my mood. But so much of the stuff that I really, really care about, as a social liberal. Number one, electoral reform. Not a fucking chance in hell if they win a majority, and we all know it. Civil liberties, personal freedoms, LGBTQ plus rights, just being really nice to minorities and people fleeing persecution, all the stuff that like really, really matters to me as a social liberal is just going to be as much of a bag of shit. But the worst thing is we're supposed to be pleased and excited about it because they're going to boot the Tories out, and I don't feel pleased and excited. I feel sad and depressed.
And I think we're going to get onto this in another podcast, but obviously we love a Hannah Kitchen rant. But it is a really important point, because I heard Danny Finkelstein, on the Times podcast having an argument with Miranda Green, saying basically what is the point of the Lib Dems, and actually what you've just said there, Hannah, is exactly why the Lib Dems exist, because there is an authoritarian streak in Labour that will never be replicated in liberal policy, that we have to be the
more than a streak, John. Goodness
okay. That's the second time I've been told off by you this episode, Lisa.
To be fair, there were a couple of motions that went to Lib Dem Party conference that I have to say were not the most liberal thing on earth. But sugar tax anymore. Should we expand the sugar tax? Oh, that's really liberal. Anyway.
But the point is, our place is really important. Our campaigning is really important. Winning those sites, sometimes street by street, ward by ward, having good liberal people fighting for our cause, even if you're not in a target seat. I'm going to be spending a lot of polling day making sure Lisa becomes an MP. But you know what? I've got to fight for my little bit of liberalism in Lancashire as well. Hannah's got to do hers in, the dark side of Yorkshire. But this all has to be done, and you guys are the people who are doing it. And before we sign off, because I have to get going, I just want to say a big thank you to everyone we met at conference. We had loads of people stopping us saying how much they enjoy the podcast when they're drifting off to sleep, going to work, going for a run, all the random places you say, and the people that stopped and shook my hand and all the rest of it, and love up the work that all the presenters like Hannah, Lisa, and all the rest of the guys do. Just thank you so much. It does mean a lot to us. And we really appreciate it. Now, Lisa's got another scowl. For those of you that don't watch on our YouTube channel, you do really miss these two giving us some good facial expression. So, Lisa, I'll let you sign off the podcast with whatever your final thought is.
Sorry, John, it's just you talking about people listening to us as they go off to sleep just sent me down a mental avenue of what people are doing while they're listening to us. I'm so sorry for doing that.
Oh, good grief, woman. Did you have to bring that sort
of
in right at the end? Honestly. Well, on that point, don't think about Lib Dems in pyjamas or anything else. We will be signing off this podcast very rapidly before we go into podcast after dark episodes, but we appreciate all you guys for listening and watching and being a part of this podcast journey that we're on. I think, it's a Friday, we record this. I'm now going to have a much larger drink before I then go off on my holidays for a week. Thank you very much everyone for watching and listening. We'll be back with another episode very soon.